Coming up on Locked On Dodgers, we got two little bits of kind of baseball news on Monday, and both of them boiled down to, wow, Rob Manfred continues to be bad at his job. So if you want to watch me ruin my chances of ever working at MLB Network, let's get Locked On Dodgers.
You are Locked On Dodgers, your daily Los Angeles Dodgers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Dodger fans. I am Jeff Snider of Baseball Essential, and this is Locked On Dodgers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Vince and I are doing a split episode, so he will be with you for the second half of this show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every day. Remember, this show is free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube simply by searching for Locked On Dodgers. This is the daily podcast covering the Los Angeles Dodgers, bringing you the smart fans' perspective on our boys in blue. And like I said in the intro, there were two little bits of kind of baseball news on Monday, and neither of them looked very good for Rob Manfred. I guess first let's talk about the report from Bob Nightingale and others that there are currently no negotiations scheduled between MLB and the Players Union regarding the CBA. As you know, baseball is currently in a lockout, and that cannot get resolved until they negotiate and figure out a new CBA. So the fact that nothing is even scheduled right now is not a promising development. I guess it's not totally surprising. Today was the first day back from what you would consider probably the Christmas break. It was my kid's first day back at school. So, not like we expected them to jump right back in, but you would have hoped that maybe they had something on the books. Okay, let's plan on getting together in mid-January, at least that they would have an idea when they would be talking again. Because the fact is, usually New Year's Day is my favorite day because I get to say, hey, baseball season starts next month because spring training starts in February. This year, I don't know if spring training is going to start in February. It seems unlikely at this point, especially if they're not even talking right now. Because the fact is, even if they decided, okay, we're really motivated to get this done, let's get together where both sides are willing to compromise, it's still going to take a few weeks to hammer out all the details. And so the fact that they're not even getting together to get to that point is very frustrating as a baseball fan. It's not all on Rob Manfred, I'm sure. This is part of how negotiations work. Unfortunately, both sides have to kind of dig their heels in, and it's probably seen as a sign of weakness to be the side that says, hey, we should get together and talk. And I hate that negotiations are like that. And it goes back to what I was saying a few weeks ago when this lockout first started. I wish there was a party involved who just had the best interests of baseball and the fans in mind. So even if that person's only role was to say, okay, you two get to the table and let's talk. Just somebody to be the adult in the room so that neither of the children has to say, okay, I guess we should talk and give up their higher ground or whatever. Have an adult. I volunteer as tribute. Get me in the room and I will say, look, you MLB, you sit there. Players Union, you sit there. Now use your words. I've been a parent for a long time. I understand how to make people use their words. But whatever it is, somebody needs to be pulling them together and saying, it's time to hash this out. Because the fact is, if baseball's work stoppage affects the season, it is going to be bad for baseball for a long time. A lot of you maybe aren't old enough. I know Vince was just a couple years old when the strike happened in 94 and 95. I was in high school, and there are a lot of baseball fans who stopped being baseball fans, stopped being Major League Baseball fans anyway, and never came back after the strike. A lot of people did, probably even most of them did. But there is a really big chunk of people who either stopped caring about Major League Baseball or at least don't care as much as they did before. I meet people all the time that, yeah, I used to be big into baseball. The strike kind of ruined it for me, and if you've got a casual fan, diehards like me, I'm going to be a fan. I'm going to come back no matter what MLB does and what the union does to screw it up. I'm going to come back. As soon as baseball's back, I'm going to be back watching. That's my weakness. Not everybody is as into Major League Baseball as I am. And they are going to lose fans. And in the 90s, it was two things that brought fans back. Cal Ripken Jr. breaking Lou Gehrig's streak was a big deal. That happened in 95. And then in 1998, the home run chase between Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa. And I hate to tell you this, there's no Cal Ripken streak coming up. There's no big deal that's going to capture the national attention like that. I don't think it's possible for baseball to capture the national attention like it did even in the 90s. You know, the home run chase between McGwire and Sosa. That's not going to happen again. Partly because, players don't use steroids anymore nearly as much, which is a good thing. But even just, the record's 73. Nobody's going to beat that anytime soon. And so, there's no big records coming up to be broken. There's no big storyline to capture America's heart. Cal Ripken Jr., his streak was just so pure, like working man's America, that the country could get behind it and, baseball fans could get behind it. And so, there's nothing like that coming up. And so if this work stoppage affects the season, baseball is going to lose fans. And I hope that they recognize that, because that is a bigger deal than any of the issues that they're arguing about right now. The bigger deal is the fact that 20 years from now, you're going to have kids who didn't grow up baseball fans because their parents stopped watching in 2021 or 2022, whatever year it is. I don't know. You're going to lose a generation of fans, at least some part of that generation, if you let this affect the season. And for that reason, the kids need to sit down at the table and start talking and recognize that it's time to do what's best for baseball and what's best for baseball fans. Owners, I know you want more money right now. Guess what? Long term, you're going to be a lot happier if there are more baseball fans. Players, I know you want more money now. Long term, you're going to be a lot happier if there's more baseball fans. I understand there's issues that are important to both sides. Yeah, hash them out. Compromise. That's what compromise is. You get this, I get this. Nobody's totally happy, but we're all satisfied. And we didn't ruin baseball for the fans. It's that simple. I know it's not easy, but it's simple. So sit down at the table and talk. I'm sure a lot of people who matter are listening to this. But, if this filters down to somebody, sit down and talk. And if you need somebody to be the person who says, hey, it's time to sit down and talk, give me a call. My DMs are open. I'm going to come back in a minute. I'm going to talk about the other news about Ken Rosenthal losing one of his many jobs. So thank you for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every day, and keep it Locked On Dodgers. Hey, it's the new year, and that means New Year's resolution. If your New Year's resolution is about getting fit or eating healthier, make sure you include Built Bar in your plan. Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar, or maybe even better than a candy bar. It makes it easier to stick to your resolution because it tastes so good you'll want to eat it, unlike other protein bars that are just gross. You want to eat healthy, but it just gets so boring. Sometimes you just want chocolate. Well, Built Bars are all covered in chocolate, and they're all healthy. 130-ish calories, 4 or 5 grams of sugar and carbs, 17 grams of protein. They are all low sugar, low carb, unlike an actual candy bar, which is all high sugar, high calorie, high carb, awful for you. So even if you're not a huge fan of working out, you can at least eat something that tastes good and is good for you. And that way, when you enjoy a delicious Built Bar, you can almost count it as a workout. They got a ton of different flavors. You can order if you know what you like, or you can order a mix box to find out what you like. Go to Built.com and use promo code LOCKED15 and you'll get 15% off your next order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. All right, our other news on this Monday came by way of the New York Post announcing that Ken Rosenthal, the tweet says, Ken Rosenthal out at MLB Network due to previous criticism of Rob Manfred. The article says, MLB Network has cut ties with insider Ken Rosenthal that is believed to be the end result of acrimony that peaked in the summer of 2020 after Rosenthal criticized Commissioner Rob Manfred, the Post has learned. The article goes on to say that a couple things jumped out to me. There was a lot said about this, and I don't disagree with most of it. It is interesting to me that MLB Network did not say Rosenthal's out because of his criticism of Manfred. And while the impression is that Rosenthal was fired, the fact is Rosenthal's contract expired and it just wasn't renewed. I know that's maybe a distinction without a difference. But when you're trying to make the point that he got fired because of something he said a year and a half ago, when he's continued to do his job for most of that year and a half, I feel like you got to come with more than it is believed. So maybe that was the entirety of why Rosenthal's contract wasn't renewed. It was entirely because of the things he said about Rob Manfred in 2020. But the evidence is not in this article. And so basically we're expected to believe an anonymous source who isn't even quoted, just paraphrased. Some anonymous source says it's believed that this was because of the things he wrote about Rob Manfred in 2020. So with that disclaimer that, I'm not 100% sure that this is the whole story, the rest of what I say about it will be assuming that this is basically the whole story or most of the story. And if that's the case, I have two major reactions. The first one is kind of the same as everybody else. Rob Manfred, super thick-skinned dude. But the second one is nobody should be surprised. MLB Network is part of MLB. Basically, Rob Manfred is the boss of MLB Network. And so it's not surprising. Think about it this way. If you owned a company and one of your employees was writing things about you personally that you didn't like, you probably wouldn't renew that person's contract. Now, is that right? Is it good? No. Rob Manfred probably ought to have a thicker skin. And, the fact is that Rob Manfred is so bad at his job in so many ways that if he's going to get mad every time somebody points out that he's bad at his job, that's a full-time job, just being mad about that. And so Rosenthal getting fired or not renewed or whatever you want to call it, it's important to note, I guess, that this is just MLB Network. He still writes for The Athletic and he still works for Fox. So we'll still see him on TV. We'll still see his articles if we choose to read them. I'm on record as saying Ken Rosenthal is an outstanding reporter. He has good sources and he is good at breaking news, and he's a good reporter. I don't think much of him as a baseball analyst. I think that he leaves a lot to be desired as an analyst. I don't think that he has the most sophisticated baseball mind out there. It's not bad, but he's not, his value is in his news reporting, not in his baseball analysis. That said, it's kind of interesting that there are other people who still work for MLB Network, including, John Heyman, who is also Rosenthal's colleague at The Athletic. And John Heyman kind of fills a similar role. And it's, if John Heyman really believes that Rosenthal was not renewed because he criticized Rob Manfred, that's got to put some questions in his head. Tom Verducci, Joel Sherman, John Morosi, all those guys thinking, okay, am I allowed to say what I think is honestly true? Because that's all Rosenthal did in 2020. He pointed out that Rob Manfred was doing some crap during the COVID lockdown and negotiations to get the season going and everything. Rosenthal just pointed out things that we all saw that were shady and garbage about what Manfred was doing. And so if you've got reporters who, whether you think they're good reporters or not, these people are professional journalists. And, First Amendment stuff is pretty big to journalists. And part of that is, just being able to speak the truth. And, it's important. A lot of people cry First Amendment all the time. And obviously the First Amendment doesn't apply to MLB Network. It just means that the government can't, the freedom of the press, the government can't infringe on that. So I'm not saying that MLB Network should be in legal trouble for this or anything, but I do think that the other journalists who work at MLB Network ought to be thinking, is this a place I want to be working? And that's a delicate situation they're putting themselves into. And yeah, it's really, really ugly. And it's part of the inherent issue with having a media wing that's owned by the league, because they're not free to report on, even the fact that MLB Network can't report on the CBA negotiations because they're not allowed to show videos of current players and stuff and talk about them. It's Yeah, it really is a conflict of interest to have a media arm owned by the league because this is a good example of why that doesn't always work out. And you often have people who aren't willing to criticize where it needs to be criticized. I don't love criticism. I think that a lot of the time, criticism just for criticism's sake is pointless. And I think a lot of the time it's people just spouting off talking points that they've heard other people say and thinking they're clever. And so but the fact is, Rob Manfred really is deserving of a lot of criticism over the last few years. And if a guy like Ken Rosenthal or John Heyman or Tom Verducci can't criticize Rob Manfred when criticism is warranted, then that particular media outlet has very little value to a baseball fan. So I think MLB Network is going to become okay. I guess I'll turn it on. I guess there's nothing else on. That's kind of what it is for me. The fact that they still employ Harold Reynolds, who is dumb as a brick. They still employ Russo, Chris Russo, Mad Dog, who his only skill is talking like this and saying stupid things. I'm the Mad Dog. Like, and then you're gonna let go Ken Rosenthal, who actually brings value to the network. It's ridiculous, and it's just another example of Rob Manfred being bad at his job. Obviously, this wasn't Rob Manfred's decision, but it comes down from an atmosphere of not being allowed to criticize the king, and so it's garbage. That's my thoughts on that. I think that's going to wrap it up for me for today. Love to hear your thoughts on anything I mentioned. Thank you again for making Locked On Dodgers your first listen every day. Vince is going to come in. He's going to talk a little bit about some free agents that the Dodgers might go after. And beyond that, I think that's it for me. So thanks for listening, and Vince will be along in a minute.
Yo, Vince Samperio here to close out the episode. Before I talk about a potential free agent the Dodgers can go after, just want to thank you and remind you to make Locked On Dodgers your first listen every morning. We are free and available wherever you find podcasts and on YouTube. All right, so I've been running through free agents. The Dodgers could go after some guys that I've talked myself into by the end of the episode. Some guys probably not so much. Today's is a starting pitcher who has not been that good in his time so far in the big leagues, but has shown promise in certain points, and that's Yusei Kikuchi. He was with the Mariners the last 3 seasons. He has had ERAs of 5.46, 5.17, and 4.41. So not necessarily anything to write home about. Obviously, where he would settle in with the Dodgers is the 4 or 5 spot, where you're looking more for innings and keeping you in a game rather than, lights out dominant pitching. But with Kikuchi, there's hope. He was really good in the first half, or comparatively speaking, really good in the first half of the season last year. Was actually named an All-Star at the half. He was 3.48 ERA, 16 games started, a 1.088 WHIP. Pretty good. Second half, he kind of imploded, almost a 6 ERA with a 1.7 WHIP. So obviously, it was a tale of two halves for him last year. But overall, there's obviously there's benefits and there's pros and cons to everybody that signs. The con here being that he has never really been that good. 4.41 ERA has, over the course of a season, 29 games started, has been his best year so far. He's never thrown more than 175 innings, which, in the role that he would be, he doesn't necessarily need to throw that many innings anyways. He's prone to giving up the long ball. He doesn't strike out that many guys. And those are all the cons. And, he doesn't have, blow away stuff. His fastball, I believe, touches 95, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, he can get the fastball up to 95. Got a cutter, slider, changeup. He's got a good pitch mix, and that's where I think he can change things up. No knock on the Mariners, but as we've seen from time and time before, the Dodgers pitching development and sequencing and little things that they can do here and there have seemed to help certain pitchers. And I think this is one where he can maybe benefit from it. He is basically split between his four seam and his cutter and pitch usage, and then he's got the slider around 20%, changeup around 10%. I honestly really like the look of his changeup. Um, he only uses it 10% of the time, but the way he throws it is uh, all his other pitches he throws for strikes a lot, which is not necessarily the greatest thing. But his changeup, he kind of works out of the strike zone a little bit and gets, he had second lowest exit velocity on pitches last year was his changeup. He had held people to a 192 or 282 slugging percentage on his changeup last year, which is significantly better than all his other pitches. He had almost a 40% whiff rate on his changeup. So, right off the bat, right there, I think he's not using his changeup enough, and I think that's something the Dodgers could exploit and use, and get that changeup usage up. Maybe drop the four seam usage a little bit, making maybe cutter slider changeup with the four seam when needed. I think that's something he could go after. Although his cutter was his worst pitch last year in terms of slugging percentage um, and batting average against and lowest whiff rate. So maybe it's a fastball slider changeup is more the move there. But either way, Kikuchi, the other pro is that he's only 30 years old. You're not going to have to sign him to a long-term deal. You might even be able to get him for a one-year deal, depending on what he's looking for personally, a one-year deal with the Dodgers, build up his value, and then that's all you really need is right there. You got, a guy that can really help you out. And the one thing that's on his side is that the Mariners declined his option, which made him a free agent. So when teams end up, giving up on guys and the Dodgers pick him up, they have pretty good success, pretty good track record. Um, Mariners specifically, Chris Taylor, that one wasn't necessarily them giving up on him. That was just kind of, moving parts around. But as we've seen with Max Muncy, Justin Turner, guys like that, the Dodgers can help turn them around. And Kikuchi, like I said, he has the stuff. Obviously, last year his best year. That's a good sign as well. He's made 32 starts and then 9 starts in the shortened season and then 29 starts. So for the most part, he's been pretty healthy. And like I said, I think getting that changeup up, usage up, maybe dropping the cutter a little bit, four seam, slider. I think the Dodgers, there's a way to work with him to make him a serviceable number 4 or 5. And that's the big thing here is that that's what the Dodgers, obviously they would like to have a number 1 or 2. There's no number 1 or 2s available still on the market, at least in free agency. Carlos Rodon's the closest, and Kershaw would be the 2 closest, but they're more number 2s on a maybe not great team at this point. Although Rodon has pitched like a number 1, but he's never done it over a full season, so that's a little bit tougher to kind of put him up there in that category. But Kikuchi, I mean, like I said, 1-year deal, you could probably get him, possibly even a 2-3 year deal at very cheap. He's a guy that's going to come out and give you innings and help you out. And like I said, as a number 4 or 5 starter, he really only needs to give you 5 innings a start, less than 4 runs, and you're looking, at least decently. Obviously, you would like better than that, but he's a guy that is going to come cheap, is relatively young still, has some pieces that work that maybe just need help, refining around the edges. And a guy that was an all-star last year and did have a decent enough year overall to warrant some kind of consideration for the Dodgers rotation. And as what we saw from last year and what we've seen in the past is the more starting pitchers, the better. And if it's someone that's going to come cheap, then why not go after him? We've talked about Pepio and Andre Jackson and Mitch White. Obviously, those guys are all could have more value or pitch better than Kikuchi could. But you also could use them and continue letting them develop in AAA and then bring them up when you need them and kind of, manage their workload a little bit more. Because let's just say you go in with Walker and Julio and then Kershaw comes back and you got Heaney and then you got, Gonsolin, Pepio, Jackson, White for that 5 spot. You're going to need spot starts here and there during the season. you can better manage your workload when you have, 5 legit starting pitchers and then everyone else kind of filling in behind them. One guy gets hurt, okay, you have the next guy step up, and then you can kind of fill in behind them. So I do think the Dodgers could benefit or would benefit from going into spring training with at least 10 starting pitchers. Last year they had like 8 legit starting pitchers, and we saw how that turned out. So, maybe 10 overall starting pitchers. You're probably not going to have the cream of the crop top like you did last year with Walker and Julio, and then Kershaw still. You don't know what you're going to get out of Kershaw, so you can't really put him up too high on the pedestal. And then, Justin May will come back halfway through the year maybe, but I doubt he'll be like a starting role. It'll probably be more of a hybrid role. You have no idea what you're going to get out of Gonsolin, and there's just a lot of question marks where Kikuchi, he's a question mark only in the sense of how good can he be or how bad can he be, but he's going to be a guy that's for the most part there for you. So that's the benefit there. I'm not necessarily 100% sold on Kikuchi, but if you go after, if you get him on a 1-year deal and just stick him in the back of the rotation and switch some stuff around, move some stuff around, sequencing and refining things, I think he'd be a guy that helps out. And at the end of the day, that's what you really want out of a free agent that comes relatively cheap, I would imagine, and that's all you can ask for. So you say Kikuchi, he could be a Dodger, maybe. I wouldn't be completely upset about it, and I would be interested to see how the Dodgers move things around and help him out. So that's all I got for today's episode. That's going to do it for today's episode in general. We'll be back tomorrow talking maybe about another free agent, maybe talking about there's a lot going on right now, or there's not a lot going on right now, but there's a lot going on right now. We'll find some Dodger stuff to talk about. So that's gonna do it. Thank you all for listening. Make sure to make Locked On Dodgers your first listen every weekday morning. We are free and available on all platforms and on YouTube. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Locked On Dodgers. You can find Jeff on Twitter at Snider. I'm at Vince Samperio. DMs are open on all those accounts if you need to get a hold of us. Other ways to get a hold of us are text or voicemail 323-863-5625 or email lockedondodgers@gmail.com. We're here every weekday morning, and we hope you'll be with us when you get in your car or if you're at home to your smart device play podcast, Locked On Dodgers. And remember, you don't have to agree, you just have to listen. Have a good one.